All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into Where the Crawdads Sing by Dilly Owens. And, you've sent us some pretty interesting stuff this time around.
Uh-huh.
Pretty positive review from the Reading on a Star blog.
Yeah.
A pretty wide range of opinions over on Goodread. And then something I wasn't expecting, some tips on how to make a really good book review video.
Oh, wow.
So it sounds like you're, really doing your research on this one before you commit.
That is a great approach.
Yeah.
I've got to say, off the bat, I think it's a captivating read, but it definitely has some quirks.
Okay,
So,
I like that. Captivating but quirky.
yeah.
Where should we even start with this one?
I think those Goodreads reviews that you sent in really highlight this kind of division that people have over this book.
Yeah.
Some readers absolutely loved it. They were talking about the beautiful descriptions of nature, Kaya's strength. They were calling it heartbreaking, lyrical, even a modern classic.
Right.
But then you have this other camp of readers who are saying that the plot was predictable, the dialogue was a little clunky, and Kaya's transformation into this self-taught scientist and artist
Right.
was a bit too convenient.
The Reading on a Star blog post was all about how much they loved the descriptions of the marsh. But I'll be honest, I kind of agree with those Goodreads reviewers. They're like, wait a second, can a young girl really survive out in the wild?
Right.
Thrive? I mean, learn to read, become a scientist and an artist?
Yeah.
It does feel a little far-fetched.
That's a fair point. I think Owens definitely romanticizes Kaya's self-sufficiency, but I think she also uses it to explore those themes of nature's power and human resilience.
Yeah.
And to be fair to Owens, she does sprinkle in some hints of outside contact and support for Kaya.
Okay.
So it's not pure isolation in the strictest sense.
Okay, so more about a symbolic journey than strict realism.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, what about the actual writing itself, though?
Right.
Because the Reading on a Star blog was really, positive about that.
Yeah.
But some of the Goodreads reviews were like, the dialogue's a little rough.
Yeah, and that's where those instructions for book review videos come in handy.
Yeah.
Because they emphasize giving really specific examples to back up your opinion.
Right.
So let's actually do that.
Okay.
Owens excels at creating a sense of place.
Okay.
Like, for example, in Chapter 3, when she's describing the marsh at sunset, she writes, "The water, now a bright lavender, reflected the fading sky."
Yeah.
I mean, you can practically feel the humid air
Yeah.
and hear the rustling reeds.
Right.
It's immersive and evocative.
Yeah.
But when it comes to dialogue, yeah, it can feel a bit forced at times, especially with some of the secondary characters.
That's interesting because that reminds me of some of the criticisms about the dialect in the book as well.
Uh-huh.
It seems like the good characters speak perfectly fine English, and then the bad characters have this really thick, almost like caricature dialect,
Yeah,
which could be seen as reinforcing some negative stereotypes.
absolutely. And that's a really important point to consider. It definitely raises questions about how authors represent different social groups
Right.
and, the potential for unintended bias.
Okay, so we got beautiful descriptions, some iffy dialogue, some potentially problematic use of dialect.
Yeah.
What else should we consider about this book before we decide if it's worth our time?
Well, let's talk genre. Where the Crawdads Sing is kind of this fascinating blend of coming-of-age story, murder mystery, courtroom drama, and even a little bit of romance.
Okay.
So you're really getting a diverse reading experience.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that coming-of-age aspect is pretty crucial with Kaya's, journey from abandoned child to this independent woman.
Exactly. And that journey is undeniably compelling, even if some of the details feel a little, I don't know, romanticized.
Right. Okay. I'm getting a much clearer picture here before we decide if Where the Crawdads Sing is a yes or not.
Yeah.
I am curious about those similar books that you mentioned.
Okay.
If someone loves that sense of place and Kitty's connection to nature, what else might they really like?
Yeah, if you're drawn to those themes of isolation and resilience in a natural setting, I would highly recommend My Side of the Mountain by Craighead George.
Oh, yeah.
It's a classic about this young boy who runs away to live in the Catskill Mountains.
Oh, I love that book.
Yeah, and he learns to survive all on his own. It captures that same sense of wonder and connection with nature that Owens evokes in Where the Crawdads Sing.
Totally. And he builds his own shelter and
Exactly.
makes friends with the falcon.
Yeah,
That's such a great book.
it is a great book.
Anything else come to mind?
Well, Hatchet by Gary Paulson is another one that fits the bill.
Okay.
It's about a 13-year-old boy who survives a plane crash in the Canadian wilderness
Oh, wow.
and has to rely on his wits and courage to stay alive.
Yeah.
Again, the focus is on that human-nature connection and the protagonist's incredible resilience
Ooh.
in the face of adversity.
Any more recent books?
Well, The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. is a memoir. It's not fiction, but it has that same gritty realism
Yeah.
and portrays a really difficult childhood and ultimately showcasing the power of the human spirit.
Okay.
So it might be different in tone and focus, but I think you'd find some interesting parallels to Kia's story.
I'll have to check those out. All right, so let's circle back to Where the Crawdads Sing.
Yeah.
Sounds like a beautifully written, thought-provoking book.
Yeah.
Some really compelling themes, but maybe also some weaknesses.
Uh,
So is it worth the read? What's the final verdict?
I think if you're looking for a quick, immersive read that will transport you to the North Carolina marsh and make you think about resilience, prejudice, and the power of nature,
Yeah,
I think Where the Crawdads Sing is definitely worth exploring.
but go in with your eyes open.
Exactly. Be aware that some of the plot points might feel a little predictable and the dialogue isn't always the strongest,
Right.
but if you can look past those flaws and embrace the emotional core of the story, I think you might just find yourself captivated by Kia and her journey.
Okay, so proceed with caution, but don't be afraid to get swept away by the marsh.
Precisely. And who knows, you might end up ever some new favorite books along the way.
That's the beauty of a good deep dive. You never know where it might lead you.
That's right. And that's what's so fun about this, right? Like this whole deep dive, it's not just about, is this one book good or bad?
Right.
It's about like, oh, if I like these elements, what else is out there?
Exactly. It's like choose your own adventure for reading. Speaking of adventures, that Reading on a Star blogger seemed to have like a really personal connection with this book.
Oh, yeah.
Like they were using words like genuine and dreamlike and even heavenly to talk about Owen's descriptions. They said that they could picture every blade of grass and they live in a city.
That's the power of good writing, right? It can transport you to a completely different world, even if you've never even, stepped foot in a marsh.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you bring up the blogger's experience because it really highlights something that I think is crucial when you're talking about books, and that's that personal engagement with the story.
Right. They weren't just analyzing the plot or the characters.
Exactly.
They were talking about how the marsh made them feel,
Yeah.
how they saw reflections of their own life in Koa's struggles.
Uh-huh.
And it made me think about those instructions for book review videos that you sent in.
Right.
Because they emphasize that personal connection too.
Yes.
Encouraging reviewers to really share their unique takeaways.
A good review is about more than just like summarizing the plot.
Yeah.
It's about sharing your own experience with the book. What resonated with you, what challenged you, what made you think differently,
Yeah,
and ultimately helping potential readers understand if this book is right for them.
I love that. Okay, so tell me more about the bloggers' takeaways. Like, what really spoke to them?
Well, they were super impressed by how Owens portrays Kai's intelligence and resourcefulness, especially given her circumstances.
Yep.
Like, for example, they mentioned this passage where Kia teaches herself to identify different bird species just by carefully observing their behavior and markings.
Wow.
It's a small detail, but it really speaks volumes about her sharp mind and her connection to nature.
So it's not just about surviving in the marsh. It's about, like, actively engaging with it and learning from it and thriving in it.
Exactly. And the blogger also highlighted how Owens kind of uses Kia's experiences with nature to mirror her relationships with people.
Okay.
For instance, there's a scene where Kia compares the way that Fidner crabs fight for territory
Huh.
to the way that humans kind of compete for social status.
Interesting.
It's a subtle but powerful way of connecting those two worlds.
So these complex themes are in there because he's not, like, hitting you over the head with them.
Exactly. It's not a preachy book,
Right.
It invites you to kind of draw your own conclusions, and I think that's what makes it so thought-provoking.
And, the blogger even compared Owens to Margaret Atwood,
Oh, wow.
another author who is known for those really nuanced explorations of nature and human behavior.
That's high praise.
It is. It makes me think about what you said earlier about, this deep dive being about more than just one book.
Yeah.
So if someone is drawn to Where the Crawdads Sing, what other authors or books should they check out?
Well, if they're loving that lyrical prose and the way Owens describes the natural world, I would say check out Barbara Kingsolver.
Oh, yeah.
Her novels often explore those similar themes of nature community, human resilience,
Yeah.
and her writing is just as beautiful and evocative.
Kingsolver's great. I've read a couple of her books. I've always been impressed by, the way she weaves together these complex narratives, but also has this really deep understanding of the natural world.
Yeah.
Anyone else come to mind?
If they're intrigued by Kia's journey of self-discovery and this exploration of social isolation,
Yeah.
I would recommend Kent Haroof.
Okay.
His novels are often set in small-town America, and they feature these characters who are grappling with loneliness, loss, the search for connection. So they might not have that same wilderness setting as Where the Crawdads Sing, but I think they capture a similar sense of introspection and emotional depth.
I like that. Okay, so there are definitely some options for people who, connect with Where the Crawdads Sing on that thematic level, even if they have different preferences when it comes to genre or setting.
Totally. And that's the beauty of reading.
Yeah.
It's a journey of discovery, and you never know where it might lead you.
Well, speaking of journeys, we haven't even talked about the murder mystery aspect of Where the Crawdads Sing yet.
Oh, that's right.
I know some of those Goodreads reviewers thought that the plot was kind of predictable,
Mm-hmm.
but the bloggers seemed to really enjoy the suspense.
And that brings up a really interesting point about genre expectations.
Yeah,
Some readers might go into Where the Crawdads Sing expecting a really fast-paced thriller
right.
and be disappointed by the slower, more character-driven approach that Owens takes.
Right, so it's more about the atmosphere and the emotional impact
Exactly.
than like shocking twists and turns.
It's a slow burn, but I think it can be really effective if you let yourself be drawn into that world.
Okay, so not your typical Who unit,
Not at all.
but it sounds like it still delivers a satisfying dose of suspense, just in a more understated way.
Precisely. And that's what I think makes it so interesting to discuss. It
Yeah.
challenges those expectations.
So we've covered a lot of ground so far. We've talked about the writing style and character development
Hmm.
and the genre and the themes.
Yeah.
But I know there are still some of those questions lingering from those Goodreads reviews.
Right.
Some people thought the plot was predictable, the dialogue was clunky, and there were even some concerns about the portrayal of dialect.
Right. Those are all valid concerns, and I think we need to address them. Let's take a closer look at those Goodreads reviews and see what else we can learn.
All right, let's dig into those Goodreads reviews a little bit more, because it sounds like some people were not as captivated by Kaya's story as that blogger was.
You're right. There were some mixed reactions.
Yeah.
Some people found the plot a little predictable, especially when it came to the resolution of the murder mystery. They felt like they saw the twists coming a mile away.
Yeah, and that makes sense. It sounds like the book leans more into, character development and atmosphere than, shocking plot twists.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not a bad thing.
Right.
But it really depends on what you're looking for as a reader.
Yeah.
Some people love those unpredictable twists and turns.
Right.
Others are more interested in the nuances of character and setting.
Right. It's all about personal preference. What about those criticisms of the dialogue?
Right.
Some people thought it was a little clunky, especially when it came to the secondary characters.
That's a fair point. I think Owen's strength really lies in her descriptive prose.
Yeah.
Her ability to paint a picture with words.
Yeah.
But when it comes to dialogue, it can feel a little forced at times.
Right.
It doesn't have that natural flow of the real conversation.
Okay, so beautiful imagery, but maybe not the snappiest dialogue. What about those concerns about the dialect, though?
Right.
That seems to be a recurring thing.
It's a really important point to address.
Yeah.
Some reviewers felt that Owen's use of dialect was a little stereotypical
Yep.
and potentially even offensive.
Right.
They pointed out how the good characters spoke in perfect English.
Yeah.
And the bad characters had this much thicker dialect, which could be seen as, reinforcing some negative biases.
Yeah. That's a really valid criticism. I mean, it is important for authors to think about how they represent different social groups
Absolutely.
and avoid, perpetuating harmful stereotypes.
It's a good reminder that even books with compelling themes and beautiful writing can have blind spots.
Yeah.
Right? And it's up to us as readers to engage with those texts critically.
Okay, so taking all of this into consideration, it seems like Where the Crawdads Sing is a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
It has its strengths, it has its weaknesses, but is it ultimately worth the read? What would you say to someone who's on the fence?
Here's the thing. Even the Goodreads reviewers who had criticisms,
Yeah.
they acknowledged the power of the book's themes.
Yeah.
They might not have loved the plot or the dialogue, but they were still really moved by Kaya's story, her resilience, and her connection to nature.
That seems to be a common thread here. Regardless of the criticism, the book's core message seems to connect with readers.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so compelling.
Yeah.
It sparks these important conversations about prejudice, social isolation, and the power of nature to heal and transform.
So even with its flaws, it's a book that leaves a lasting impression.
Yeah, I think so. It's not a perfect book, but it's a thought-provoking book. And sometimes that's enough.
Yeah.
It's about weighing those pros and cons
Yeah.
and deciding if the book aligns with your personal preferences.
Right, and ultimately, I think the best way to know for sure is to give it a try yourself.
Absolutely. Dive into that march, immerse yourself in Kia's world,
Yeah.
and see what speaks to you. You might be surprised by what you discover.
Well, there you have it, another deep dive complete.
We did it!
We explored that glowing praise from the Reading on a Star blog.
Yeah.
We waded through the mixed reviews on Goodreads. And we even, got some good tips from those book review video instructions.
Absolutely.
We unpacked the beautiful writing,
Uh-huh.
the compelling themes.
Yep.
And yes, even those clunky dialogue moments and concerns about the dialect.
It's all part of the process.
So hopefully we've given you enough information to decide if Where the Crawdads Sing deserves a spot on your reading list.
That's the goal.
And if you do decide to venture into the marsh, let us know what you think, what resonated with you,
Right.
what challenged you.
Did you get swept away?
Exactly. Reading is such a personal experience. There's no right or wrong answer.
That's right.
The important thing is to find books that, speak to you, that ignite your imagination, and that stay with you long after you've turned that final page.
Absolutely.
So on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. If you were in Kia's position, abandoned in that vast and unforgiving marsh, how would you have survived? What lessons would you have learned from the whispers of the wind and the secrets of the tides? It's something to think about, isn't it?
It really is, and it's a testament to the power of storytelling to transport us to other worlds and challenge us to see the world through different eyes.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another adventure in the world of books and ideas.